Thank you for being here. We're going to talk about meta science, or more reflect on how we do research, what kind of infrastructure we have in place for disseminating research. So maybe we as researchers, I'm going to kind of embody different moods that we can get into. One of the moods is, how on earth have we outsourced research dissemination to for-profit? How has it been commodified? And this is maybe a dominant mood for me. But there is also another mood, right? So let's be realistic. Everything is already commodified. There are a lot of services that are actually attached to academic publishing that we might not see. But at the same time, even if we accept the capitalist model of academic publishing, the kind of things that would function well in capitalism is price sensitivity, non-oligopolies, but this is also happening in academic publishing. So even as a commodified system, it has its problems. Now, I don't want to have a pity party today. There is also another mood, and I want to end with this mood, and maybe we're going to oscillate between these moods. But another mood is, I also feel like that we're on the precipice of new open science, a wave of open science. You have researchers who are looking at the facts, like Lisa. We have researchers who are trying to do something about the system by organizing collective action. We have senior people really working really hard, like Mirjam, for Radboud University Press to push alternative ways of publishing. And we have people like Jeroen, Sondervan, who is driving a very progressive program in terms of policies. So this is our schedule today. 25 minutes for the external speakers, so Jeroen and Lisa, and then 5 minutes of questions. I would say, Lisa, you can already come here. Lisa is a postdoctoral scholar at the Hanken School of Economics. She has a PhD in political science, and she is a really productive scholar when it comes to, or a productive scholar in terms of finding out how the scholarly publishing system is organized and in a quantitative manner, as we researchers like to see.
Good morning, everyone. I'll see where my talk fits in with all the moods. I think it's going to be a mix of pessimism and optimism. And yeah, I'll walk you through the evolution of the academic publishing system. I'm going to point out some of the biggest issues that we have in the current system. And then I'm going to explore potential avenues out of this mess. And hopefully by the end of this talk, you'll have a better understanding of the challenges that we face and the opportunities that we really have to make this a better system. So I always think that if we want to understand anything from a current standpoint, it is good to take a step back and to look at how did this develop? Why is this in place? And why is it the way that it is? So if we look at how academic publishing has evolved, and if we look at the before times of academic research, we see that researchers have, or scholars have first communicated through in-person conversations and then moved on through to written correspondence. But I'm sure you can imagine how that was really inefficient as soon as you wanted to communicate with more than one person. So with the invention of the printing press, one solution came in the form of academic journals. So these early journals were quite different from what we understand of them today in their form and function. So they would publish journalistic reporting, book reviews, and snippets of research before they really moved on to original research. However, they were the start of serial publishing. And this is one of the earliest publications. It's Philosophical Transactions. It was launched in 1665 by the Royal Society of London. And in these early times of academic publishing, what we see is really a prioritization of knowledge dissemination, much more so than commercial gain. For example, the Royal Society of London, they did a few strategic things in order to improve the circulation of knowledge. So one of them was that they allowed reprints, they offered heavily discounted subscription prices, and they also engaged in strategic gifting, where they would give free copies out to influential institutions and researchers. So this early period was really characterized by heavy community subsidy by learned societies and institutions, but also by government support. And that was necessary in order to fund the publication and the distribution of academic publishing. And I think what we can see from this is back then we thought of it in very different terms. Academic journals weren't meant to be generating profits. They were something from the community, for the community, and they were being supported by all kinds of actors that were not in a commercial space. But that all changed in the mid-20th century. So we left behind this community-subsidized model in favor of one that is dominated by commercial entities. And there's a few factors that contributed to the shift. So first, we have the rapid expansion in research publications, and that is because in the post-World War II period, we also see a really rapid increase in government funding of research, which then, of course, led to more research papers being produced. At the same time, we also see research fields becoming more specialized, which then created the demand for field-specific journals and more journals to being created. These two things taken together in combination with the increased globalization meant that publishing would become ever more expensive, and it would be impossible or very challenging for institutions and learned societies to support the publishing activities. But then came commercial publishers, and they were like, we can help you. And they really saw these trends, and they thought, oh, this is a great opportunity for us to enter the academic publishing market. So they started to acquire already existing journals by learned societies, and then they also launched their own journals. So a few milestones in this period would be the launch of the Science Citation Index in the 60s, the impact factor in the 70s, and then Elsevier's acquisition of Pergamon Press in 1991, which really marked the beginning of a period of intense consolidation in the market. And that brings us to scholarly publishing today, where the landscape is really dominated by a small number of really big for-profit companies. So we see a high level of market concentration and excessive profit margins. And how bad that really is, I want to show you here. So in these two plots, what we see is the percentage of journal articles published by the big 5 companies over time. The big 5 are Elsevier, Springer Nature, Sage, Wiley, and Taylor and Francis. And what stands out from this is that in the 70s, the amount of research published by these 5 companies was around 10 to 20% across all disciplines. But then fast forward to the early 2000s, and these publishers accounted for over 50% for most fields. Of course, this means that these companies make a lot of money, and we can see that in the plot B, which shows the profit margins and operating profits of Elsevier's scientific, technical, and medical division, so that includes their publishing arm. And if we look to the right side of the plot, we see that their profit margin was just below 40% in recent years. And as a comparison, tech giants like Google or Apple, they usually are at 25%. And I think this is really just crazy, thinking that we're giving them the product for free, the research papers, and then they're selling them back to us. And they make a lot of money, as you can see here. And this money are resources that are going away from the academic community towards shareholder pockets. They can also be used, and they are being used, in lobbying efforts to stifle the progress that we really want to see. So all these changes have led to certain issues in the academic publishing field. The first one is accessibility and cost. Scholarly communication relies in part on research libraries' ability to purchase research for us, right? For us as researchers to do our work, we need to access the literature, and if we can't do that, well, what are we going to do? What we can see here is that the cost of journal publications has really risen just exponentially and really rapidly. It rises at a much faster rate at the than the general cost of living, and that really highlights how unsustainable this whole enterprise for us, the academic community, really is, and it really highlights the burden placed on libraries. That becomes especially clear if we look at library budgets and how they have developed over time. So here we can see that although university budgets have risen and almost doubled in the last 2 decades, library budgets somehow had the opposite development. They've almost halved. So what this means is that while serial prices are rising constantly, they're now also taking up larger and larger chunks of library budgets. So I'm pretty sure some publishers might argue, and do argue, that libraries nowadays, they get much more stuff. So these high prices are justified in a way. But the bottom line is that if the library doesn't have the budget, they can't spend the money, and we won't have access to the research. So enter open access. Open access was or is a movement that was meant to solve this problem of accessibility by making research really available online. The Budapest Open Access Initiative launched in 2002, and they called for the removal of access and permission barriers. And while the academic community thought of open access as something that could democratize knowledge and accelerate scientific progress, commercial publishers came to think of it as another cash cow. At first, of course, there was a lot of backlash against this movement because they felt really threatened in their traditional business model, but then they really quickly adapted by introducing article processing charges for open access fees. And colleagues and I were really interested in seeing how much money are they actually making with this. So we looked at all the papers that the big 5 that I mentioned, published from 2015 to 2018, and we took the list prices, so documents directly provided by the publisher, and we came up with an estimate. And we found that in just this four-year period, they made around $1 billion, just these 5 companies, in addition to what they make from subscriptions. And what this shows is that by now, APCs are really a considerable source of revenue for publishers. I also think it is quite helpful if we drill down a bit further and to see what we pay and what it actually costs to provide open access. So in our study, we found that on average, the APC was $2,000 to $3,000 US, depending on whether this was a gold or hybrid open access journal. But others, like Grossman or Brems, estimated that the actual cost of providing open access would be in the ballpark of $200 to $1,000, depending on the level of service you get from the publisher, the publishing level, the publishing volume, and the rejection rates. So if this price difference does not make you too uncomfortable yet, I just want you to remember that nature charges $12,000 per paper. So while open access has definitely increased the amount of research that is now just freely accessible on the web, in some cases, APCs have reached exceptionally high prices that are seemingly disconnected from the purpose of providing OA. And the problem with these high APCs is that they are really unaffordable to many, many researchers. And that this can and does limit who can participate in scholarly publishing. So why then does this whole system still persist? And I think one key factor is that academic career advancement and funding opportunities are heavily tied to publication metrics. So for example, the number of publications or the journal impact factor. And I'm sure we're all familiar with the impact factor. We know it's a terrible metric that is being misused. But unfortunately, this journal level metric is still being used to evaluate individual researchers. So here, colleagues and I looked at review, promotion, and tenure guidelines from US and Canadian universities. And we found that almost half of the research-intensive universities do mention the journal impact factor in their guidelines. Most of these mentions were supportive, and in many, many cases, the impact factor was taken to mean something about quality. So of course, publishers have a vested interest in maintaining this whole system because their business model depends on the prestige and the exclusivity of their journals. So the idea that publishing is essential for academic success really suits them. And they're using the impact factor as a marketing tool for their journals in many, many cases. Often they try to hide it. In the case of Springer Nature, they don't. So here, basically, they're saying we're going to increase APC prices. This is our goal based on improving the impact factor. And I find this quite problematic, considering that Springer Nature has also signed the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, and thereby agreeing to the need to greatly reduce the emphasis of the impact factor as a promotional tool. So now that we heard about all things wrong or some things wrong with academic publishing, I do want to explore a few potential avenues out of this mess. So I think if we really want to address the issues of accessibility, cost, and commercial control in academic publishing, it is key for us to support and invest in open and community-led infrastructure, services, and projects. As by developing alternatives to commercial publishing platforms, we then also can create a more equitable and sustainable publishing system. And we can do this through a few ways. We can, for example, support the development and maintenance of open source publishing platforms like OJS or Janeway. We can encourage the growth of community-led and nonprofit publishing alternatives like the OLH, and fund the development of open infrastructure like Crossref and OpenAlex. And by supporting these platforms, we can help to reduce the reliance on commercial publishers and their proprietary platforms. And these initiatives really support open access. They have equity at the center of their organization, and they put the needs of the research community and the public before commercial interests. The second point that I want to mention are secondary publishing rights, which I think are a great tool for authors to retain ownership of their publications, and it enables them to share their work freely, irrespective of the publisher's copyright policies. It's also a tool that could strengthen libraries in negotiations, as when most or like a considerable share of the journal content is already available online, they're in a much stronger position to argue for lower prices with publishers. In recent years, we've seen also renewed interest in secondary publishing rights since the launch of Plan S, and they see it as a way to achieve compliance with the immediate OA requirement without relying on APCs. Of course, we could and we probably should expect backlash from publishers because, well, there always is. But such policies could, for example, include an opt-out option for authors that would allow for more flexibility. And we are already seeing really positive examples like the journal Science that now offers a zero embargo green OA. So basically it allows authors to share their work immediately after publication through a repository. And that is the fully peer-reviewed version of the article. And then the last point that I feel really, really strongly about is that if we are really serious about addressing academic publishing, it is crucial to reassess how we evaluate research and researchers. And I believe that this would involve moving away from an over-reliance on publication metrics, especially the impact factor, and towards a more holistic form of research assessment, where we really value the quality and impact of the individual. This could take the form of qualitative assessments, for example, and also take into consideration a much more diverse range of research outputs like data sets or software or public engagement activities. And by that, we could address or start to address the issues of the publish and perish culture by reducing really the pressure on researchers to publish in these high impact journals. And I think this is an important point. We can reduce the power that publishing companies have in dictating the terms of academic success. So the actions that I mentioned here are by no means exhaustive. They're not going to solve all the issues that we have. There's not going to be the one size fits all for all institutions. There's not going to be the one magic bullet. It's maybe going to be more of a kilt of solutions, but nevertheless, they represent important steps towards returning ownership to the academic community and towards creating a more sustainable system. Thank you.
5 minutes of questions. And later on, we also have a panel discussion with everybody. Anybody have questions? Thank you. This was great, Lisa. I do have a question. So the right retention improvements.
Yes.
What kind of dynamic? What kind of pressures were getting these journals on board with, for example, this kind of green
I think if more and more authors would want to retain their rights, and if more institutions would implement such policies, at some point the pressure on publishers would be too much, and they would have to back down because authors could just take their work elsewhere. But yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry that I came in late. My train had a medical emergency in it. But I think this is. But in the Netherlands, I don't know. We have this very special, what they call them amendment taverne. So that means that everything you publish that is sponsored or granted by a Dutch institution, you can publish for free on your website. And they say if you get sued by a publisher, then we take care. That's the you share, we take care thing that they do in the library. And actually, everyone in the Radboud University, as of I think last summer, has this as an opt-out option. So everyone is doing this except for when you explicitly say that you don't. So actually, all of us that work at the Radboud University, you're already sharing everything you publish funded by a Dutch grant or European grant institution for free with the Radboud repository.
Yeah, that's very good to know.
Do you know of any cases where researchers have been sued?
There
Researchers-
was a lawsuit.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
think so. I don't think because it was done so this was really an amendment in the copyright law of the Netherlands.
An amendment in Parliament, and because it was done so massively, I don't think the publishers have dared to file a lawsuit yet. So I don't think it has been done because it really said, okay, if we do it, the Dutch government will take care of it, and yeah. It's called the Amendment Taverne by the Member of Parliament that proposed it.
Yeah, it works. Yeah, sorry, I can follow up because I was part of the national project group implementing the Taverne amendment at the university level, and I can acknowledge that the publishers, they weren't happy about it, especially so because we also included, it's about short scientific works as it is stated in the legal text, but we considered book chapters also as short scientific works, so we added book chapters in that policy. And especially there was some critical feedback on that. But until now, so knock on wood, there hasn't been any lawsuits or whatever. And another comment, there is a distinction between the Taverne Amendment, which is a legal instrument. Really, it's in the copyright law. That's secondary publishing right. And in institutional rights retention is policy. So that's not the legal instrument, it's really university policy. In the UK you see several universities now have an institutional rights retention policy, which allows researchers to basically store their papers in the institutional repository. But I know from the UK that there have been quite a few publishers that were sort of approaching authors or institutions about it. No lawsuits. I don't know of any of them, but it's a different way of achieving the same goal, right?
And I think ideally you would have both that would complement each other.
Yes, yeah, that's it. It's a very strong, both are very strong instruments from the start. That's the institutional rights policy. And at the end, in legal aspect, the secondary publishing right. If you have both, then you can do a lot of stuff.
Okay, any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you for the very nice talk. Somewhere in the beginning you mentioned that there were lobbying efforts on the side of the publishers, and I was wondering what that entails exactly.
They could, for example, push back, or when we saw, or it was starting up, and it wasn't quite clear which direction was it gonna go. They obviously wanted to advance their costs and wanted to find a solution that is most beneficial to their business model. So they used this idea of hybrid open access, and that hybrid open access would be a really comfortable way for researchers to achieve open access, of course also for them to keep their high profit margins, and that they push this through research policy.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
I had one question, Lisa. So the transparency of journals, is that so you have to get your data somewhere, right? So is there also a pressure on even the for-profit journals to become more transparent? And is that, if so, is it working? Well, the kind of data that is being openly available to see how much revenue they're generating, or...
Oh, that's great, actually, yeah. So we've had some pushback from publishers, or some criticism from publishers on that study that we did, and they were like, oh, so they argued, on the one hand, this can't be right, this is way too high, and then the next sentence, like the same publisher would be like, oh, actually, it's also quite too low. And so our response would be just open up the data, just if you give us the data, we will publish a revision. But so far, these price lists have been the only thing that has been available, and of course, they update every year. So you have to kind of save them continuously if you want to do like a longer term analysis. I've contacted publishers before because I couldn't access some of them, and I asked for the data. They do not give the data, even if it was before like, publicly available.
Thank you so much. This was great. Next up, Mihaela, orthopedagogics PhD candidate here, but also very active here on the campus as an activist, I would say. Oh, sorry, this is
mine. I was wondering. Hello, everyone. Nice to see so many people here. So my presentation will sort of build a bit on Lisa's, and I will reiterate some points, but I will focus more on basically the injustice that this kind of publishing system perpetuates. And I will also try to offer a solution, not necessarily for how to fix the publishing system, but how to organize ourselves as academics. And in that sense, I will present the initiative of Free Our Knowledge and how we try to deal with this situation. So Free Our Knowledge is a platform founded by Dr. Cooper-Smout that wants to help research organize collective actions in support of open and reproducible research. But I will mention exactly how we want to do this at the end. And I wanted to include a part of why I decided to join this collective. Well, I did my bachelor in Romania, and for me it is quite clear how important open science is, because in Romania the first thing that our professors told us in our bachelor was, this is Sci-Hub, guys. You have to use it because our library has no funds. So without these things I wouldn't have been able to probably be here or complete my research. So this is quite an important topic for me, and it's nice to find a collective that also engages with it in this manner. And now to start, well, we have been we have been talking about the publishing system. Is it working as it currently is with the subscription fees? And the answer is it's not working. Yeah, I think this has been emphasized, and also related to the profit margins. Lisa was comparing them to the other big companies. We can see quite obviously that their profit margins, this is a picture from 2018, they are very big. We know that the publishers are focused on making profit beyond caring about individual researchers. And most affected by this are underprivileged individuals and universities. And a good documentary is Pouw, The Business of Scholarship. I don't know if all of you know it, but it's online, it's free to access. And what I found interesting is that Brian Nosek, the director of Open Science Center, at some point goes to Belgrade and asks these people, oh, it's so interesting that you all work on implicit cognition. How come you all decided to do this? And their answer is simply, we can access the literature. So it's quite obvious how this kind of a system also pushes what research we can do, especially in countries that don't afford to pay the fees that the publishers ask for. And now the solution, as Lisa presented, has been, okay, we can fix this by moving to open science. However, as was mentioned, subscription fees are now, what this means for the publishers is that now subscription fees are complemented by article processing charges. So their revenue streams, the profit that they started making for this is also from Lisa's paper, which I found very good, and I really recommend reading it. So the profits have increased since open access was pushed. The profit from APCs have increased, and even though more open papers are being published, this does not result in lower fees, but just increased profits. And this is how much the Netherlands paid from 2015 to 2018 in APCs. So it's, as you can see, $60 million, just to get an idea. But people would say, at least everyone has access to research. Isn't this what we want? However, I think when we start incentivizing and rewarding open access in this manner, like I have seen this already happening, if you go to a PhD defense, it's quite likely that people from the committee say to the PhD that presents, oh, it's so nice that you have published in open access journals. But what happens when authors are from parts of the world that cannot afford to pay APCs? Well, a report by OECD about this has predicted that this can lead to greater disparity between researchers, that basically fields that do not have so much access to funding could have funding limitations, that it also can shift what topics we choose again, because some topics might receive more funding than others, and that research in developing countries could have less access to publish their research. In this report, they also said that it would lead to less publishing, which is actually, it seems, not the case, but I will talk about that in a second. And there was one study that was done by a Danish researcher in Denmark, and he wanted to see how many authors could not publish if this was the case, that you could only publish through APCs and open access. And he arrived at the conclusion that 30% of Danish authors that publish in Danish journals could not have their research published because they were not backed up by an institution. Some of them were retired, some of them just did this individually on their own, so these people could not have access if only publishing open access through APCs was the choice. And basically they also arrived at the conclusion that this could lead to polarization between groups of researchers that are lucky star researchers, as they call them, that live in rich institutions, and people that are not so lucky. So this is also, yes, regarding how much it actually costs to publish. This is for Nature Communications. So one single paper costs 5,690 euros. Although the Fair Open Access, according to the Fair Open Access Alliance, you do not need to pay more than 1,000 per article if generating profit is not the main purpose. But this is apparently not the case. Okay, but let's say we don't care about the researchers in developing countries. What do we have to do with them? It seems like this kind of model also impacts research quality, namely because when journals make profit depending on the numbers of publications, it seems like they are more likely to want more publications, so the turnaround times and the rejection rates become lower. And then we might, combined with AI, we might find some of the, I don't know if you're seeing these examples, they are quite trending, of articles that have been retracted. This is an article that included this AI-generated image. And this is also another article that was retracted that starts with, "Certainly, here is a possible introduction for your topic." So apparently this model could also lead to a decrease in research quality. At least that's what some people are saying about this. And the perspective that Free Our Knowledge takes on this issue is that we are stuck in a collective action problem because researchers are incentivized to act in ways which hurt them and their communities. And although any individual can take a stance on this, like Lisa was saying, by supporting certain initiatives or deciding where to publish, this could impact their career because, again, the publishing in famous journals is still incentivized. So basically, what we could do is that we could start organizing together, and I'm going to now offer some examples of how this has been previously done in academia. And one example of how this has been done specific to publishing is by resignation of editorial boards, and somebody is going to talk more about Lingua, one of our speakers, I think. So basically, editorial boards resign and decide to move their journal from a big publisher, for-profit publisher, to find other methods of financing themselves and becoming open access. So Lingua switched to Glossa, and they switched from Elsevier to Ubiquity Press, Lingua, and Library of the Humanities. And there's also the Journal of Informatics that did something similar in 2009, also switched from Elsevier to MIT Press, so moving from big publishers to university presses. This is one example of what has been done. Yeah, and Lingua is not like, it's quite a famous journal, so this is also important to mention, and it still maintained its quality, so it's not like moving from, necessarily from a big publisher decreases the quality of the journal. What else has been done? Well, a group of mathematicians boycotted Elsevier. They decided they don't want to publish with Elsevier anymore, founded the Cost of Knowledge, which is now signed by 20,600 researchers. And basically, this is what they say, that they want to replace the for-profit model with something that is in favor or favorizes as academics. And they also say that Elsevier is an exemplar of everything that is wrong with the current system. So it's another way of organizing together. There were also institutional boycotts of Elsevier. University of California did this and pressured them to reduce their fees and to basically ascribe to their demands. And beyond this, yeah. So this is what they negotiated with Elsevier and put pressure on them. Yeah, so this was the reaction to that. And also what we are currently seeing, and is also academics organizing together. For example, we can see this in the Palestinian Solidarity encampments, where professors and staff are having clear demands and putting pressure on universities, which also seem to work because things are starting to change. Yeah. So we are trying to do something similar, and Free Our Knowledge has a specific way of dealing with this. Namely, we invite researchers to join our Diamond Open Access initiative, which wants to push for making a demand for Diamond Open Access journals that do not ask for payment for publishing the research articles, neither from the reader nor from the author. And how we want to do this is by asking people to pledge that they will publish an article in a Diamond Open Access journal in the upcoming 5 years. However, the pledge activates only after 500 signatories have been achieved, because we decided on a critical mass that indicates shared commitment, and it is also a number that could be used to bring forward to university boards and say people actually want Diamond Open Access alternatives to commercial publishing. We should support these kind of things. So basically, our takeaway is also in agreement with the Budapest Open Access Initiative. And we believe that when you do want to publish open access, you should remember the goals to which open access is the means. Yes, favor models which benefit all regions of the world, and avoid entrenching models in conflict with these goals. And this, we invite you to do this by basically reading our initiative, and if you want, sign the pledge. It's especially good to have professors doing this, because PhDs still need the reputation for their career, unfortunately. So any support with this is welcome. We also are an expanding organization. We're quite small at the moment, so people interested in joining our team are also invited to contact us. And yes, let's organize together to create a more just academic system. There's the pledge if you want to read it. Yeah, the references.
Questions?
Just a comment.
Yeah.
For the listeners. Oh, sorry. Yeah, online. So you showed the California system withdrawing themselves from the Elsevier contract. By the way, they now have
been back, yes.
renewed their Elsevier contract for a couple of years. But I remember that when that happened, there was a small decline in the stock market of Elsevier. So it can have impact, basically. So,
yes, boycotting works.
yeah. So just a comment, just to add to what you were saying. Yeah.
That's nice to know.
You don't have a question? Any other questions? Okay, Mihaela, so for Free Our Knowledge, what kind of, if you look towards the future, what will be the next steps, you think?
Well, I think for now I'm quite focused on the Diamond Open Access initiative. Like, it would be great if we would manage to get the 500 signatures. but maybe also looking into how you can support editorial boards that want to make a shift from a commercial journal to start their own thing up, which is quite ambitious, I think, but it would be nice if people that want to do this would have a support system in place, I believe.
Okay, thank you so much. This was great. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, next up is Jeroen Sondervan from Open Science NL, which is a governing body of NWO, if I translate this correctly.
Sort of.
And that's an organization that tries to accelerate open science within the Netherlands, especially on the policy side of things. So really looking forward to this talk.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for inviting me for this session. Is this working? This is working, so I can move around a bit. The slides which I show are also online. You can read them afterwards. Many links to the things I've been showing on the slides along the talk. Donders, and then the date of today. So if you have any questions afterwards, please feel free to send me an email or to contact me. So I'm that policy guy, but not without saying, this is just to show you that I come from the publishing industry, non-profit, university press, but started working in publishing in 2007 and developed several Diamond Open Access journals from 2009 onwards, collectively funded. Have seen the troubles and the issues and the problems that it takes establishing these diamond journals based on collective funding. Then I moved to Utrecht University as a publishing consultant, really as a support for researchers in their ambitions regarding open access on all aspects, so publishing, but also projects, etc., etc. And then I moved to the policy side of the University of Utrecht, working in open science and open science implementations, but then with the open access as a main project. And last year, April, I started as program lead open scholarly communication, which is a much broader vision, I would say. I will come back to that later. And this is so-called, in Dutch we call it regieorgaan, which is a terrible name. And untranslatable, I would say. But in English we always say now this is a national initiative funded by the ministry, OCW, for 10 years to really advance with open science and to make open science the norm within 10 years. And I will focus really on the Dutch landscape. Of course, I will make some reference to the international status, but this is really to show you where we come from. So open access in the Netherlands, it started really in 2003, 4, 5, also signing the Berlin Declaration, for instance, by several institutions like universities, but also the Dutch Research Council. But in 2013, we have seen really commitment by the government, stating this ambition towards 100% open access by, at that time, 2020. 2020, right, Dirk? You're here, the expert as well.
2020, and now back to 2020.
Yeah, 2020. But this really ignited the work on open access in a more collective way. And then moving forward to today, this has really grown to, let's say, the open science realm. We've seen the National Plan Open Science in 2017 as a Kickstarter to really advance with open science. And now, last year, this extra investment came from the ministry to really work on implementations towards open science at large. So, about open access, and I'm always using this pyramid by Brian Nosek, who was mentioned before by the previous speaker. This is a model for a theory of the culture change in academia, but for open access. So we have policies, universities, but also the Research Council, mandating open access, if I talk from the Research Council perspective. But we really work together collectively with all the stakeholders here shown on the slide. And this is really a top-down way approach of achieving this 100% open access ambition. And of course, we work together with international stakeholders like Science Europe, which is a collective of the research funders in Europe, but also other open science programs and in different countries, like Finland and France and Ireland, etc., etc. So, but it's also about incentives, right? Really rewarding scholars and researchers to practice open science and to publish open access. It was also already mentioned. I will just show you two projects on the left side, and I have a very good expert here in the room as well, Casper, previously working at NWO as well, on these projects. So Room for Everyone's Talent, addressing several things that need change in reforming recognition and rewards. But open science is really also a pillar in that project. And on the right side, this is the strategy evaluation protocol. You can compare it to the Research Excellence Framework in the UK, right? So how to assess research and researchers, and also there open science is one of the pillars taken along. And again, this is really a collaborative effort of all the Dutch stakeholders in research. So, and it's also about making it normative. So I guess the communities, this is really the glue between the policy, the top-down and the bottom-up things that are happening, like establishing diamond open access journals in a more collective way, for instance. So, it started in Utrecht. It was the first community, open science community. Now, as you can see, we all the universities have an open science community. And just recently we managed to fund from the Open Science NL initiative these communities all together. So just to give them a push again, really to advance with this community building and to make open science and therefore open access the norm. And then making it easy, or the user interface or the experience, or also the infrastructure part. This is really about how can we publish open access. Now, yeah, I've listed a few, the roots and the diamonds and the colors. We all are engaged, so all universities and the Dutch Research Council, the stakeholders listed here, are currently engaging with, especially I would say, the green, the hybrid, and we are now starting to these full the full OA, the APC-based publishers, to engage with memberships, for instance. And we just started with really collectively work towards Diamond. I will show you that later. And as you can see, the Taverna Amendment, I mentioned it here as well, that has shown really as a, it was already mentioned, as a strong instrument to achieve almost 100% open access. Several universities now have 95, 98. I don't know, Dirk, what's the Nijmegen figure at the moment?
The UMC isn't part of the opt-out procedure.
Oh, okay, okay.
You're now hanging at like 88.
No, yeah, a nice figure anyway, right? So, but this is all nice. But I would say also to problematize, and also what we've heard from the previous speakers, that still the state of affairs is that publishers or service providers, they consider themselves as the market. They own the stuff, basically, right? So, and they dictate many things through the contracts, through the read and publish deals, how things are going. We're still stuck in this this excellence framework of prestigious publishing, the impact factors, all kinds of things we have heard from the previous speakers. And this is really these models based on basically ownership of the content. And that leads to exclusion and also a lack of control, which is really an issue. And also the IP and the data exploitation, for instance, which we see, and this is from a colleague of mine, Jeff Pulley, who wrote an article on surveillance publishing. The big publishers, they are sitting on a huge amount of data, information from the papers, but also from the researchers themselves, and they can monetize this, and they do, and they do a lot of stuff with it. It's a very nice paper. I recommend you to read this. So I think we need to change and we need to shift more to the models based on really services, taking back control, and therefore also ownership. And that's really based on our own academic values and the principles, and also the principles of open science, I would say. And also looking at the issue of the digital sovereignty, which is now really also being discussed, and also on a national level. And it was also mentioned that is fair and transparent pricing, which is really an issue. We have the APC, but we don't know the breakdown of these costs. We know from a few publishers that are starting to open up this kinds of information, but the very profitable ones, they are not sharing anything at all. So, and I just want to give you a few sketches of current developments which are happening. And I guess that's really based on the shifting role of, let's say, that more traditional journal, where the registration of the paper and the archiving, and also the peer review, the certification, and also the dissemination was based on the version of record, the PDF, the final version, owned by in many cases by the copyright by the journals. But now we see, and also open science really opens this, that as an individual or as a researcher or as a research collective, you really can take back more agency. The peer review, the archiving, the awareness, using several tools allows this. And really this is also a shift from, let's say, this idea of the version of record, which publishers like to hold because of it can be monetized in a good way, for them in a good way, really to the record of versions, the open science perspective, of open scholarship perspective. And for me, open publishing in the context of open science and scholarship, it's really, we can hopefully make the changes, the rightful changes, and we can be disruptive, and we can hopefully also innovate. Just to, there are many more subjects to take along, but I want to focus on three aspects. So, broadening and disintegration, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and open infrastructure. So, broadening, and this is it's difficult because, as we've seen, for the articles, it's we're not even there yet. But we need to talk about it's much more than only an article, right? In getting things open. What about the books? What about the book chapters or the conference proceedings or many other outputs that are currently not in policies or not funded enough to make them open? So that's an issue. And I guess also this means it's more than a PDF. What about that, right? So. And then the change from the version of record, so the final published version, to really to a record of versions, which you can think of the preprints, for instance. I will show you that later, but also other research outputs. And what you can see is that many new platforms are emerging. I just listed here one, Octopus, which has started recently, just I think a year ago, funded by the UK, right, the English Research Council, and developed by JISC, which you can compare to SURF here in the Netherlands, so the infrastructural party of the UK. And it's not about the end goal is not the final version. It's really about opening the whole research cycle. So many objects are developed, data sets. You can think of many things, and you can really open the research cycle, and I guess that's really an interesting approach, and many more examples exist. The disintegration of the journal function, so on the left side more the traditional, so the peer review and the dissemination, it's all together in the sort of traditional sense of the journal, but there is, in many fields, this preprint culture is existing for a longer time, like in archive, in physics, mathematics. But in the last 5 or 10 years or so, there is really a huge growth of so-called preprint service or or open repositories where you can share your papers in an early version. And not only for, let's say, the STM disciplines, science, technology, medicine disciplines, but also in the humanities and social sciences, for instance. And what's fairly new is also these peer review platforms. So this is really about the dissemination part. Hey, you can store a preprint and you can ask for community feedback, for instance, through peer review platforms. So this is really, and many of these things are community owned or scholar led. The whole, let's say, publishing business is looking at this, and they are taking some steps, but this is really coming from the community. Just to show you some examples of eLife or Open Research Europe, which is a new platform funded by the European Commission, which enables you to, from the start, from a preprint start, towards a final version with open peer review, and these kinds of new innovations. And I mention here publish, review, or curate because this is now being mentioned several times, also in the line of the current Planes, or at least the new strategy of Planes. So maybe you've seen that there is a proposal published by Planes, a vision, strategy, how to move to, for instance, taking back control, but also the sharing of research. Now output is needlessly delayed. Can we move to, instead of first review and then at the end publish, maybe turn it around. First publish through preprints, for instance, or early versions, then review, and then journals can curate the material. This is a proposal. And it was surveyed as well. That has been closed, but there will be a report coming soon, I think just after the summer. So if you are interested in the outcomes, please look at the newsletters or the Planes website. And it's not, so this is already happening, right? So just recently, a few weeks ago, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation refreshed their current policy, which is based on Planes, but they take a head start towards this publish, review, and curate model. So first, an article needs to have a preprint, and then we can move forward based on this policy. The inclusion part. So we already heard a lot about the issues, right? So from the historical part, how did we came to this situation? Many things have been mentioned already. The for-profit publishing in the lead, but also this really high expenses on publishing, and the APC model, which is really excluding things, but also languages, right? So it's really Anglo-Saxon focused, the whole publishing business, and domestic languages are really squeezed out. And also beyond open access. We have, at some point, let's say, a huge amount of open access material, but how do we make it meaningful for instance, citizens? Looking at, for instance, this open science goal, engaging citizens with research. Just a question. I'm not going to answer that today, but we need to ask those questions. So I'm really happy that, and that is just recently, for a few years now, this whole Diamond open access, which isn't new, by the way, it's already decades where journals have not charged authors, but it's really now also on the highest, I would say, at the policy level, the country level, where Diamond open access is really addressed. That we should move towards more equitable and inclusive publishing models. So I just listed here a few examples also, and looking at the Netherlands. So we have the new University Presses Network, and Radboud University Press is a member of that network. And we see a lot of engagement with new practices, I would say. And also university libraries are really experimenting with publishing initiatives, open books, open textbooks, for instance. So that's really a good thing. And we have local, Groningen University Press, for instance, has its own installation of open journal systems in this case. But we also have national publicly funded infrastructure through openjournals.nl, and Radboud University Press is making use of that as a platform, right, for their journals. So I guess that's also really a nice collaboration between having your own brand and own local instance, but you make use of public infrastructure to make it happen, and to also have a cheaper option. And I mentioned Open Research Europe. That's on the European level, which looks quite promising as a platform which can be hopefully at some point a public infrastructure for everyone. And just to show you that had this so-called project Diamond Open Access in the Netherlands started just recently in February as a, let's say, an organized way for 2 years to come up with solutions, how to collectively fund, for instance, Diamond Open Access and Diamond Open Access infrastructures from the library perspective. So that project is running and will end in 2 years, and hopefully at that time we will be having some more structured way of supporting and developing Diamond Open Access. And last but not least, the open infrastructure part, so open science or open publishing practices, it needs open infrastructures. And some of you already showed a list, I think it was you, Lisa, with several open publishing infrastructures. I just list here a few which are, and some of are collectively funded already from Dutch university libraries, for instance, and the Dutch Research Council. But yeah, this is really an important aspect of moving forward, I guess, to create alternatives, right, compared to the, let's say, the commercial or the really for-profit publishing businesses. Yeah, there are several ways to support. So this is just highlighting a few things you can do, or we can do. So through advocacy, which I'm doing now, and you as well, Lisa, and others, but also through memberships, in-kind support, developing infrastructure yourself, maybe. And these are just on the right side a few examples of things that are already being financed through means by university libraries and the Dutch Research Council. And I want to sort of close off, and then I will briefly show you the Open Science NL project. And that is something that I have been starting sort of, so now we are talking only about open access publishing, right? But it's much more than that, and I think it really needs to connect well with, let's say, the open science paradigm and the open science principles. And I just listed here a few questions of, okay, how could we connect? And that's something I did also in Utrecht. Not to have like these pillars, so moving forward with open access, but neglecting what's happening in fair data or software or citizen science, for instance, but really try to connect and network these different ambitions in a meaningful way. So these are just questions to think about. Where do I publish? How much do I publish? Do I need to publish another paper, or can I do something else, or do I need to do something else? And how do I publish open science? Through, for instance, preprints or registered reports, pre-registrations, using open licensing, and maybe publishing a data in a fair way is already good enough. Question we can discuss. And last but not least, it's very important to have these open science skills, so it should also be really embedded in, I guess, the educational programs of researchers, PhD level, but even BA and MA level, I would say. Yeah, this is just a quote. True equity requires us to think about ways of opening up the entirety of the scholarly conversation to all participants wherever in the world they are, wherever they work. Coming from an interview I did with Kathleen Fitzpatrick a few years ago, but I really like this quote, at least to have a broad vision of how we could see this. And then something briefly about the Open Science NL program. As mentioned, it is financed by the Dutch Ministry for 10 years, hopefully. 10 years, 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 10 years It was launched March 2023, last year. So we are now, a year later, we have a working program, which you can look up at the website, openscience.nl. We launched it, we published that working program just before Christmas, and it has a 2-year span, the first working program. And I already mentioned this, the orgaan. We are embedded in NWO, which means that NWO is the organization which holds the money, and we need to adhere to the processes of NWO. But we are governed by our own governing board, steering group. So NWO is a partner in the covenant of Open Science NL, which has 14 other players, all universities of applied sciences, the Royal Academy of Sciences. It's a huge group of stakeholders which have signed this covenant to work towards open science. Website open in September. At that time we had not so much to share, but now we do have a lot of things to share, also calls and programs. And this is just to highlight the focus of the areas which we are engaging with. So we have 4 pillars: open scholarly communication, fair data, open software, and citizen science and societal engagement. But we really try to cross-fertilize these programs through these bars: the capacity building, infrastructure, open science infrastructure, robust research processes, evidence-based for open science, and empowering communities. So, for instance, the local communities at the universities. Just a few examples of this is in Dutch, but it's also in English on the website. But we already started financing a few projects in the last couple of months, and more to come soon. And we have advisory panels for all the 4 themes. There's someone from Radboud, by the way, in this advisory panel, Serge Horbach, who started at Radboud. But you can engage with us through the platform, the website, but also through the advisory panel members, and please do. So if you have any ideas or anything that you want to share with us, or talk about open science in general, please approach us. So with that, I want to conclude my talk. Thank you.
So you were mentioning at some point that in physics and mathematics, and I also know this also from a friend, that he was surprised that we have this kind of discussion even in social sciences, because they all use archive.
Yep.
So I was just wondering if you have any idea how the culture there became so different, because I'm also assuming that is incentivized or in some way rewarded, since they don't depend that much on the others' existing structures.
First of all, it was founded by a scholar of a researcher himself. So also they're community-driven, scholar-led, right? So that's, I guess, the first step. But still, I always hear from physicists, for instance, oh yeah, but we already have archives, so it's all been solved, right? No, that's the preprint stuff. But then they're still wanting to publish in high impact factor journals, because that's what the research assessment is about. So still, this system, it still keeps working, right? So we have preprints, yes, but still, all the researchers, many of them need to publish in high impact factor journals, which are, in many cases, with commercial publishers. So it's part of the solution, but it's not like the real solution, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah, I do want to follow up on that. I listened to some of your podcasts, and I thought it was, I'm really a fan of what you're doing. But if I'm really critical, I feel like, why would the Netherlands or the NWO just not force one publication, Diamond Open Access, for the whole of Netherlands, and be progressive? And then in some moods, I start to think, well, maybe because we as the Netherlands also want to be, we don't want to, we are also competing with others on a national level. As the same thing that we as researchers find it difficult to do individual actions because it will hurt me.
Yeah.
On a national level, these similar dynamics occur, which in my thinking sometimes that prevents NWO, for example, to do really progressive things. What is your analysis of my simple thinking here?
Yeah, so I think this is the tension between in the case of NWO we have a mandate, so you need to publish open access, but the how,
Diamond, I mean,
yeah,
Diamond.
okay, Diamond, yeah. I guess that's really about also so we can mandate open access, that it needs to be shared widely because we want to the funding we give, we want to have impact and outreach as much as possible for the funding we give. But where to publish is not a question. And this is really also, I guess, but you were in this recognition and rewards discussion. Maybe you can say something about this as well.
Yeah, well, maybe let me introduce myself first then.
Yeah, sure.
My name is Casper Gosink. I work here now as head of education and research policy at the Faculty of Social Sciences. But the last 8 years I've worked at NWO and on policies like DORA and recognition and rewards. With these things, well, first of all, I think NWO is pretty progressive compared to other funders, also compared to other institutions. But there's also a question of legitimacy that you have to think about. You need to have enough people want to follow your policies. You can't only say everybody that comes through our doors has to comply with this. If you do things that large groups of people disagree with, it's very difficult. Yeah. And well, especially for recognition and rewards, you see that there is a large base of people that support it. From the research that we've done at NWO, we saw that about 80% of the people that are going through the system, whether they are in assessment or in the applicant side, support the policies, but the other 20% are pretty loud and also have the ear of government sometimes, or government parties. I think also with the new government coming in, it's something that you have to take into account when you try to change things.
And the aspect of freedom of publishing, right? So that's also a very
yeah. But you need a critical mass that wants to follow in the direction you're going into. So I think that's always a balance that you need to strike.
Thank you. Thanks. Any other questions? Yeah.
Maybe I should leave this for the final round, I don't know, but since this is coming up, and following up on Wim's point, I wonder to what extent these initiatives are sort of remain at the level of wishful thinking, because the scientific community has an addiction problem. So we are addicted to the competitive publishing. And in a sense, it's not different from the agricultural sector being addicted to particular chemicals that we know they hurt the community in which they are used, but still you cannot avoid using because otherwise you're out of business. So doesn't this call for, instead of local initiative that can make some difference at the local level, but obviously are not going to be able to change the system as a whole at the international level, would this require a legislative solution so that you organize, even as a Europe level, would be still too small, but it might start to make a difference, whereas universities, granting agencies in Netherlands, yes, might make us feel better, but practically they're not going to make any difference.
Yeah. Also here, there is a sweet balance between legal and practice, right? So, but for instance, this Taverne Amendment, this is a legal instrument which has been added in the copyright law in 2015 to allow researchers to open their papers. But in the Dutch case, the text was, maybe that's typically Dutch, but the legal text was so vague that no one used it, or no one felt comfortable to use it. We as universities have taken that as, okay, this is the legal text, and we are building policy based on the legal requirements requirements or legal aspects. And so this is, I think, a nice example of having the legal background or the legal backup, that's a better word, and policy. On a European level, so the European Commission, for instance, is really pushing this open science agenda. It started with open access in the, I think, the framework program 5 or 6. Now we are in Horizon Europe, and open science is really on a policy level the norm. But the European Commission is looking at also discussing legislation, for instance. Could we go into a so-called secondary publishing right on a European level? And that's much more, that's even stronger than on a national level. We have a few countries in Europe that have a secondary publishing right, so enshrined in the law, but it could be taken on a European level, which is a really interesting case, and they are looking at it, but it's also difficult, as you can imagine. Yeah. But it's a very good question. Yeah.
Mag ik dit uithalen zonder dat ik iets breek?
Nee, ik heb hem eruit gehaald, maar hij wil niet.
Oh, de HDMI. Oh, ja.
This is also to follow up on the discussion, because you mentioned that European policies are striving for open access.
Yep.
But in the same time, I think Diamond Open Access is included in this open access. But isn't it very dangerous to conflate the two? Because, for example, I am thinking great that the Netherlands is being financed and people in the Netherlands can make their things open access. But in the same time, for example, if I would come from Romania and want to apply a position for here, didn't have the money to publish open access, and the reward system is based on that, it seems to me like it creates a very big problem, maybe even bigger than having fees in the first place.
Yeah,
so I think, is there anything differentiating this two from a policy level, or what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so you mean, on, let's say you have the things happening on a country level, and maybe on a European or the European Commission level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we of course have the policies and also the ambitions in the European research area, which is much broader than by the way the European Commission. So, but open access, open science is also part of that agenda. Yeah, and so I think we are constantly working at aligning as much as possible. But still, there is in many cases there are gaps. Yeah, and I. Yeah, that's something that is still in place. So we need to work on that constantly, I would say, which is a very diplomatic answer, but it is the truth. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next up, and then we will go to the panel discussion. Mirjam, I know Mirjam as actually a senior professor in linguistics, and only later on I came to know that she's really active for Radboud University Press as a chair of the editorial board. So I'm happy that you will discuss something about local action as well.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm a researcher, and I have been the editor of a journal for several years. And I think what's special about this journal is that we moved it from a traditional publisher to an open access journal. And I'm indeed working for Radboud University Press, and I will combine those roles to tell you something about my experience. The first few slides will be rather quick, because I think that everything that I wanted to say has already been said, except that I would like to add a few comments. So what I was planning to tell you, what you already know, is that roughly there are 3 types of publishing models. There's a traditional model that we have been talking about. And what I would like to add is that what is bad about this model is not only that the readers have to pay, but also that we as authors give away all our stuff. So we give the contents of our articles, the contents of our books to the publisher, which then owes this content. So if later on we would like to use a figure that in another article, for instance, that is not for free. So I see that also as a big problem. Then we have this other model we have been talking about, which I called here the regular open access model, where authors pay for publications in the form of article or book processing costs, and where readers don't pay. We discussed this already, that this is also not the way that we would like to go. because still too much tax money ends up with the publishers. And as we have heard, this is also a very unfair model for authors that are affiliated with institutions that are not as rich as ours. And what has also been said before is that what we see that a lot of rubbish is published. And what we have seen in the past is that there are journals which have then still researchers as a kind of editorial team who then determine whether a paper is published or not. And then what we see is that maybe this team decides that articles have to be rejected, and then that the publisher says, no, we still want these papers to be accepted. And what I think is really good is that in the past what we have seen that whole editorial teams just step down because they didn't agree with the policy of the publishers. But we need researchers that are, that courage to say, okay, this is not what we want. We really don't want to have involvement from the publishers. Then where we have to go is also what we heard is where we want to go is Diamond Open Access, which is free for readers and for authors. And what is also important there is that authors retain their ownership of the contents and the title. That's what I forgot to mention earlier. It's not only that you give away the contents of your article, but that also the journals who are publishing with a given publisher give away their title to the publisher. And here there is no involvement of the publisher with which articles are accepted or rejected for the simple reason is that publishers don't make money depending on the number of articles that are published. So I think that what we have heard before is that it may be logical that journals, I would like to focus here on journals, move away from the traditional journals publisher to Diamond Open Access publishers. That would be good for the authors and be good for the readers. Nevertheless, when I talk to editors of journals, then I noticed that not everybody is that convinced that this is the way to go. And this might be because they are used to their traditional way of publishing. So one of the things that people are a bit scared of is the whole idea that you only will have a digital journal. So that you no longer have a printed volume and that, at a given date you have to have this number of articles that have to be published and then is sent to universities, for instance. So what I would like to say to those people is that I would say, well, if you move to a Diamond Open Access publisher, this is still the possibility. So you can still have your volumes the way you have. And it is even possible, even with Diamond Open Access publishers, to have in the end this volume printed and send it out to your members if you think that that is really important. But luckily what you see is that there are fewer readers who really would like to have this printed version. But what I think is good about the digital journals is that articles may be published, if that is what the editors decides upon, when ready. And that is good for the authors, because as soon as a paper has been accepted, it is possible for everybody to read. And I think that also for editorial teams, this is really beneficial because that there is no longer pressure to fill this volume with so many articles on a given date. So when I talk to editorial teams and I see that there is a certain, there's a lots of work, for instance, in May or in September or October, these people know exactly when the burden is to finish off all the articles. And that is then no longer the case because the printing and the selecting of the articles will occur during the whole year. Then another complaint that I hear is once you have digital journals, then you don't have any special issues anymore. But that is also not necessary because you can still have special issues, although we like to call them then special collections in that case. So it is still possible that articles can be grouped around the themes. So you can still have your regular articles and then something that is called a special collection where you collect articles on the specific themes that are maybe organized by guest editors and that is accompanied by an introductory article. And what I would like to stress is that once you have those digital journals, that the articles can benefit from all the advantages of the internet. So you can also not only refer easily to all kinds of documents, but you can also easily refer to programs on the internet that can be interactive. And you can also have growing publications. So it can be the case that you have an article that says, okay, I discussed those 4 diseases, but now I have gained more knowledge about a 5th disease, and I would like to add this to the article or to the book. And that is all possible once you go for digital journals. So I think there's all reasons to move to a Diamond Open Access publisher. But I would be the first one to admit that that is a very hard process because I experienced this myself. So first what you see is that publishers own most titles. That means that if you would like to move to another publisher, then you lose the title of your journal. And so this happens, for instance, with Lingua. So Lingua left Elsevier. Elsevier didn't like that and said, well, Lingua is my journal. So what ended up is that you heard before, is that the whole editorial team stepped down. They started up a new journal, Glossa, and luckily many readers and authors were very loyal to this movement, and so they started publishing their articles now with Glossa. But what Elsevier did is that, they just kept the title. And nowadays, when you look at the website, you will see that Lingua still exists, and there were other researchers who felt the gaps and became the editorial team of Lingua. So that is something that can happen. I was the editor of Laboratory Phonology, and so together with Lingua, we moved from our traditional journal to what was then Ubiquity Press. And for us, it was a bit more easier because Laboratory Phonology is the journal of a learned society. So we owned the journal, or the title, but the publisher that we were with, Mouton de Gruyter, they didn't want to acknowledge that the title was us. And it was ours. So what happened in the end is that we got money to pay lawyers, and those lawyers had then to negotiate with this traditional publisher that the title was ours. So and then we won that, so that was good. But then they wanted to keep the number that comes with the title. So then we need again help from the lawyer to convince this publisher that also the number was ours. And then of course in the end we will also wanted to have the issues that we had already printed with Mouton to take it with us, so that it wasn't the case that part of the issues were open access and the older ones were not. And again, we needed the help of a lawyer. So moving away from a traditional publisher is really hard. And you need to help from lawyers. And that also means that you need grants to support your move to a Diamond Open Access publisher. And we were lucky that we did have that grant. And so what I think it is best if a couple of journals leave simultaneously, and I think it's also easier to get grant money to make that move if more journals do this. Okay, so then you go to Diamond Open Access journals, and we have already discussed this a bit. So the question is, it's nice that it is Diamond Open Access, but then the question, who pays for this? Well, learned societies often do this because then the members actually pay for the journal. We discussed this already, that there are open libraries. So the Open Library of the Humanities, and the system that is behind here is that you have the libraries of different universities in the world who pay the Open Library of the Humanities, which then pay for the publication of articles for a given number of journals. And there are also university presses. There are now coming more university presses that are Diamond Open Access. And the Radboud University Press is one of them. What I think is important to stress here is that journals addressing similar topics, so being really in the same field, that they should be with different Diamond Open Access publishers just to spread the risk. The whole point is that in all those cases, or especially the second and the third one, we are dependent on other institutions to pay for the publication costs. And those institutions are dependent on the governments in those countries. So it is, or the university. So it's good that we spread the risk, and that some journals go in, are published here and others over there. And so, for instance, that we not all publish in Open Library of the Humanities. So I think that there is good that there are also university presses. The Radboud University Press was funded about 2.5 years ago, and we publish about everything that is related to science. So also textbooks, but also popular science books. And since a few months, we also have a dissertation series. And we are paid by the Radboud University, and that means that the publication must have some relation with the Radboud University. But they never specify this, and we take it in a very loose connection. So if there are several researchers in some faculty and say, well, we think that this journal is really important for us, then for us it is good enough to take that journal with us and to pay for the publications. Or people who have worked here for 3 months and then moved on to other universities. We see that all as a connection with Radboud University. What is important for Radboud University Press is not only that we are a Diamond open access publisher, but also that we publish really work that is of a high quality. And that is really important for us. And that is why we have an editorial board with members from the different research institutes of this university. And together we determine which types of publications we want to publish. And I said currently, because there are also things that we said, this is important, but we don't want to do that right now, because we first want to establish a name for ourselves, that people not only think, oh, Radboud University is Diamond Open Access, but that they also understand what is published by the Radboud University Press is good stuff. So what we also did is we established guidelines for peer review, for journals, a book, etc. Doesn't mean that we tell journals like, this is the way that you have to do it, but more like, this is what we think that the criteria are. And journals can organize this in different ways, but they just have to convince us that the peer review is of a good quality. The members of the editorial board are active in the sense of reviewing books. So they organize the review process and they assess the peer review. So it's not that they review the books themselves, but that they have other people do that, but evaluate this. What we also do, and I think that is important, so we are just more than a publisher, is that we also guide beginning authors and also guide editors of book series or journals. And we also monitor the quality of journals and book series, what is actually also done by other publishers, in that we regularly have conversations with them and see whether they're still on the right track with ensuring that there is high quality that they publish. So this is what we have published so far in 2.5 years. And here are the services that we provide. So you see there are all kinds of things like design, findability on the web, indexing, marketing, archiving, printing on demand, because still people would like to have things on paper. And we do this partly, as we just heard, also by collaborating with other university presses. So for instance, we have a shared submission website system for books, and we are working to have the same thing for articles. And this collaboration is really necessary, because setting up a new press, a new publisher press, is hard. There are lots of things that you have to find out, lots of things that have to happen. So it's good to collaborate, but on the outside still to be different. But we collaborate a lot, and it also saves a lot of money. So you might wonder, okay, does it mean that the Radboud University Press is heaven? And I would say yes, because we are Diamond Open Access, and we only try to publish high quality work. Well, maybe we're not that heaven, because what you also see is that when you start a new press, there are lots of things that have to be done, and this university gives us a lot of money to do all of this, but we still don't have the income or the money that the traditional publishers have. So we're still in the startup phase, which means that we still have to organize a lot of things. But we also just don't have the money to provide all kinds of services that traditional publishers can provide. So we can't give secretaries to our journals. And the marketing, yes, we do marketing, but maybe not as much as some of our authors of books would like to. And we are working on this. partly by collaborating with the other universities, but also trying to get grants or try to see together with other journals where they could grants. So working on this, but I think that university presses at the moment can still not be compared with the traditional publishers, and that is something that we have to work on. And we need also the politics that they have to give us more money to do this. Thank you.
Questions? We're going to morph into the panel discussion too, so I'm going to move some chairs. So anybody would oblige me with a question? Yeah?
So maybe just how can individual researchers help up with this, or can they help up with, I don't know, support the university presses themselves?
Of course. So I think that there are several ways to do this. So we have an editorial board. We need people who are in there, and it just takes time. So people are willing to put time on this. So that's one thing. The other thing is willing to publish your work with those university presses. I mean, you might still, it's a risk, you know. So what you see is that some people prefer to go to the traditional publishers because, you know, then you know what you're getting and they have a lot of experience. But you could also say it is a benefit to go to a starting a publisher because they might not be that experienced, but then you can really get everything that you want because they're trying to do everything that you would like to. As a researcher, you could try to convince the journals that you are involved in to make the move. That is what I did when I was at Laboratory Phonology, because I had to convince this whole all those members that this was a good idea to move to an open access journal. And given that most of our members are American, and in the United States, they weren't as far as we were here in the Netherlands, especially. So, it took some time and effort to convince the journal that we had to make this move. So I think that there are all different ways that you can make a difference as a researcher.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mirjam, I was also curious about Lingua. How is it doing?
Lingua.
Yeah.
I don't know how it is doing. I just looked it up and to see how things were. But what I do know, because this is where I come from. I'm a linguist. I never hear anybody talking about Lingua. If people talk about journals, they mention Glossa, but Lingua is never mentioned. But I didn't have a look at it, how it is going right now.
Okay, you're not collaborating.
No, of course not.
Okay, I will ask the speakers already. Yeah, the speakers to sit here too. So maybe it's not, I know it's a long session, but I also think it's not every day that we have these experts here today. Do you have particular questions and or themes that you would like to discuss here?
Yeah, thanks. Well, it was very interesting. Is the mic on? Yeah, okay. Well, I'll start just by confessing I am an editor of a journal run by Springer Nature, and I have a financial interest there that I to disclose, just so that you don't dig it up afterwards and wave it at me. So in brief, the stuff about copyright and so on, I don't think it matters. You always have the right to use your stuff, and you can put it on bioRxiv. Second point, impact factors. Well, impact factors are important because it's a quick way of assessing the quality of a publication. If you want to see how good a publication is in terms of citations, you have to wait 10 or 15 years. NWO set up this rat race where we're all chasing after impact. If you're a young scientist, you have about 2 or 3 year window of opportunity to establish yourself. So if you've got a publication in Nature or Science, that's going to help you a lot more than publishing in any other random journal. And that's the rules which the external funders set for us. Right? Why Nature charges 12,000 for a publication? Well, that's peanuts compared to what research costs. Any country which can afford €1 million for a research project can afford 12,000 for a Nature publication. It's just how it is, right? What I saw all the time is we live in a capitalist society, we accept capitalism and everything else, So we can accept capitalism in publishing as well. The problem is excess profits, not the fact that publishers make a profit. Publishers provide all sorts of services which, sorry, Radboud University Press is never going to be able to provide. You can't compete with Springer Nature or Elsevier. So the key action should be to try to reduce the profits of the publishers instead of setting up some Disney world of alternative publishing models. Final point. No, hang on. I haven't finished. I'll have one short rant and then I'll stop. Final point. Be careful what you wish for. What I see, open access publishing means basically you can publish any rubbish provided you pay for it, right? Every scientist here gets about 20 invitations to publish or become an editorial board member of a parasitic journal every day, right? So the cheaper you make publishing, the more rubbish is going to get published. Scientists now, open access publishing is leading to a reduction in standard because what scientists now do, they just start at the top in the pecking order of impact factor and they just go down until they get accepted. They don't even listen to the comments a lot of the time that reviewers make. When you go to complete free publishing, you're going to get it even worse, right? So you've got to have some mechanism to reduce the amount that people want to publish. The whole model of the publishers is based on enormous growth, publish as much as possible, salami slice as much as possible. But until you tackle the problems, excessive profits of the publishers and a science model which is basically short-termism and puts enormous pressure on early career researchers, you're not going to solve this problem. You're probably only going to make it worse. That was my rant.
I'm not sure that I understand. The whole thing about the journals. Because suppose that you take your journal and bring it to an open access, a diamond open access publisher. So what would be against this? Because you still have your editorial teams, you still have your editors.
No, sure. Well,
so
that's what Neuroimage did, right? I mean, Neuroimage left. It's now imaging neuroscience, and Neuroimage has just completely stayed with Elsevier, has completely filled its board with other experts in the field of neuroimaging. So I don't see any problem with this, right? I don't see any problem. I'm not against these models. I share a lot of your criticisms of the publishers. I just think a lot of the attempts at solving things are turning out to create more problems than they solve. Like when 20 years ago, everyone said open access is going to solve everything. All it did was created thousands of parasitic journals. Yeah.
But I don't think that the system, for instance, that we now have at Open Library of Humanities, where you still have the editorial teams, and Radboud University was taking over journals. I just don't see. I think it only solves problems.
But science is always going to be science. Nature is always going to be nature. Those things are worth something, right? It's not. It's like your house is. Your house is worth €1 million, but the bricks are only worth 10,000, right? The fact you can sell an article in Nature or have a publishing charge of 12,000 is just reflective of the fact that's what people are willing to pay. That's simply economic.
But we could also wonder, why doesn't Nature move to a diamond open access publisher? What would be against that? Because if it would still keep its name.
Yes.
And then it would be as an open.
But I mean, the point is, I think, is that publishers own these titles. Publishers, I think, are entitled to make a profit. But they're entitled to make a reasonable profit. My problem with the publishers is not that they're making a profit, because they're doing all sorts of things that we are, as academics, quite honestly, lousy at. Right? They do the marketing.
Maybe for books, but not for journals.
Journals as well. I mean, if you run a journal, there's a whole infrastructure behind that journal, which is not provided by the university, not that I've ever seen.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I've been an editor of a journal, and what I saw is that we mostly do everything ourselves. Yeah. It was from Learned Society, so the Learned Society also provided the secretary for us, and then we brought the articles to Ubiquitous Press at that time, and then it was published. And
no, I mean, I would be fine with a completely diamond open access world. Yeah. No problem with it. I mean, but you have to accept the realities for how they are and how NWO imposes realities on us in terms of.
Not only NWO, by the way, or also the universities themselves, of course.
Maybe picking,
The only remark. So I need to digest. I know these rants. The thing that I really agree with is the excessive way of making profit, right? So commercial or for profit isn't wrong in the sense of, and it can have many good ways of, let's say, driving innovation, etc., etc. But the excessive profit, that's the real issue. We need. I don't see how we could easily tackle that.
I think it's very easy. I mean, if all the European nations,
regulation,
the United
yes,
States would say we're not paying more than $1,500 per publication. Problem over. But you don't need to set up all these other things. You would have solved the problem at a stroke.
Yeah, you can either do it by forbidding through policy, which is really, I guess, almost impossible, or by regulation, which is even taking a longer time, probably. But that's really, I'm completely aware that, and I agree with you that this is the angle, right? So the real, I guess, discussion we should have, need to have. A few other things is, I guess, also researchers' behavior or publication behavior, right? Publication culture. And that's you, basically, the researcher who can make choice. You have a choice, right?
No,
so
we don't have a choice. Sorry, we do not have a choice.
You do have a choice, at least in the realm we are now. So, for instance, at NWO, we introduced a narrative CV. We are moving away from that you need to list your high impact factor journals.
NWO assessment panel looking at those CVs.
It's in transition, so we are in transition, yes, but and it's difficult.
Have one shot at their careers, right? It's okay. I have a choice. I'm an old professor. I can choose these things. But if you're a PhD student, if you're a postdoc, you need a VD. The NWO imposed this structure on us: Vini, Vidi, Vici, or else you're a failure, right? You don't make it, right? And if you're going to go down that path, you've got to do everything to get up that slippery pole as fast as you can, and your best way of doing it is by publishing in high impact factor journals, because that's the only criteria which is there. And you can have all your DORA agreements. It just means people say, okay, what's your 5 best publications, or what are your 10 best publications, instead of what's your H index. Fine, but it's still there at the bottom line.
At the bottom line, maybe in practice now, but I guess this is the transition phase. So this is also.
No, it's not.
Mihaela, you wanna?
I hear you say that you're submitting preprints in bioarchive.
Yes.
So you're from the life sciences medical.
No, anyone's submitting we do. People put MR methods papers on in bioarchive.
Yeah, sure.
It's no problem. It's no problem, sir.
Yeah, but the thing you said about hey, so you can do anything. That's about preprints. Yes, you can do. You can do anything with your preprints, but the final version, in many cases, copyright is still signed off to the publisher.
Yeah,
right?
but you still
because
have
of this
free use of it. The way people were talking, you didn't have any use of it for all academic purposes. You have it. It's just for not commercial. If you lost it, and if you're smart, you update your bioarchive to the final version before you submit it, right? So it's really not a problem. It's a non-issue.
Okay, I want to have some room for other voices.
Yeah, I was just curious. Why do you think that the age index can't be changed or shouldn't be changed, or there shouldn't be no initiative to change it, since how you describe it in your terms?
Age index is an irrelevance. I'm not interested in age index.
But that is connected to people publishing because they need an age index.
Index is a stupid index, right?
Okay, so we should get rid of it, but in the same time you say that this is the reality and it cannot be changed.
Look, you can have a paper. We had a paper recently, or there was a paper in our field which had been on bioarchive for 4 years and then got published in Science. The moment it got published in Science, there was a tidal wave of interest in it, whereas anybody could have read it in the period between 2019 and 2023 when it was on bioarchive.
Yeah, but that is because we are taught to function on this idea of prestige, which is not necessarily connected to quality. And according to research, the reason why trash is being published, please don't interrupt me, in open access journals, is because journals want more articles. Like it's clear that in MDPI, Hamachi and Frontiers, now they want more special issues because they can charge for APCs.
Okay,
so
this is the end point of the capitalist system, right? You publish as much as possible, you generate more publishers. If I talk to Springer, they only want to have more papers being published everywhere because, of course, it's more profit. That's clear. It's up to the scientific community to break itself free of this. But I don't want to monopolise this discussion.
Well, I'm not sure if we're agreeing or disagreeing is the issue.
I'll be happy to be.
But your last comment is valid, right? It's up to us, basically.
Yeah.
So you do think that we should organize a change for this.
The people like from NWO, if you change the career structure, if you decrease the emphasis on publication volume, on impact factor of the journals, the reason why people are prepared to pay so much to publish in Nature is because it's worth so much for their careers, right?
Yes.
It's peanuts compared to your gain in your career if you get a Nature publication.
But I don't know, so, yeah, I feel like we're also trying to legitimize a system just by saying, well, we're already paying a lot of money somewhere else, or we're legitimizing the system because, well, NWO should solve it.
No,
or I think that kind of perpetuates it.
We're not sacrificing our PhD students. That's what we're doing.
I'm saying, like, if my PhD students get a shot at a publication in Nature, then I'm not going to say, no, sorry, it's too expensive, because then I'm shooting down their careers. So the thing is that I think most of us scientists would like to change this, but I don't do publications on my own. My publications are with my PhD students, so I can say I want to publish somewhere else, but then I shoot down my PhD student and postdoc's career, so I don't. So I would love to. I mean, I'm in the editorial board of the peer community. It's one of those review sites for. But I'm not telling my PhD students to publish there. Why? Because it has no prestige. And that's the end of it. And the prestige is not something we determine. I mean, and it's indeed. I mean, if I don't know if you read the last round of Veni applications, but I've seen many where you say, yeah, but you don't have any high-profile publication. That's how they get their CV back. So what do you want us to do? So I'm a big fan of all these initiatives. But as long as the funding and the prestige is not solved, scientists are not going to do it.
So we need more progressive policy?
Yeah, we are working. Casper has been working on this as well.
Yeah, if I can respond shortly, maybe. I'm quite surprised by the sort of fatalistic approach here. Yeah. I've spent 8 years in these committees at NWO, seeing the way people evaluate. And the evaluations are usually, I think, quite good. People are willing to look at the context, are willing to look at the quality of publications outside of these major journals. And yes, there are differences between fields. Definitely the step that's taken is a lot larger, for instance, for psychology than it is for cultural sciences, for instance. But I've seen almost only committee members willing to look at it differently. And I think it's also a sort of a false dichotomy? No, I think so. You can have great articles, obviously, in these journals, but for instance, by removing journal impact factor, it doesn't mean that these same publications aren't relevant anymore, but it just opens up room for people that choose a different path. So, well, personally, I'd say don't be too afraid, because the panels are willing to look at it differently. And there's also a thing here. You can say this is NWO's fault, but NWO has never prescribed these things. It's the people on the committees, and it's about who you select. It's about how you instruct people. I can tell you, you don't believe me. But yeah.
But aren't we saying that you should prescribe it? Because then everybody is forced, and we rate each other accordingly.
So I think there are things here where you say, okay, for instance, if you're from a country where you can't have published open science, if you are a PhD student of a professor that doesn't want you to, you should have the room to provide context. So in assessment, it can be considered. It shouldn't. It's always a difficult thing to say, okay, these are the metrics, or this is the bar that you have to meet. There needs to be room for some discussion, for information, and it also means, and I think that's something that's sometimes difficult to get across, what NWO does is trying to have a substantiated selection, not the only right selection. And the changes aren't that visible when you look at the whole, but there are people that choose a different path that actually get grants now. And I think that's a really valuable change.
But don't you think that's only for the people who can afford
who don't have the other privilege that maybe I or you have in your life are the ones that make that decision nowadays, and that's really great, and I completely agree with that movement. But don't you think it's creating this shift of people who can afford to make different choices and the people who can't?
No, because if you can't, you can explain it. I think so, and I think that so the shift isn't that big. There are a few people that get grants now that didn't before because they have made a different choice and can explain it. 95% of people getting awards still have a very traditional career and traditional way of publishing. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just not the only way to do things. And I think it's a circular reasoning to say, okay, so this is the system that we have, so this is the system that it should be.
No, I'd say the system is largely...
We have a question there.
NWO, right?
We're about to wrap up as well, so...
I have to admit it's not a real question, and I'm also kind of an interloper because I'm in the humanities. But as an editor of a Diamond Open Access journal in Indigenous Studies that has grown to become one of the main ones in the field, I want to push back on this suggestion that Diamond Open Access journals are somehow lower quality, or that we don't do our peer review properly, or any of those other things that felt suggested in the statement, right, that like bigger journals are somehow better and then people go lower to open access ones. I'm just saying I think it makes sense to invest in making all journals open access, Diamond Open Access, and to creating more Diamond Open Access journals, and to just make that a new norm, and to make these policy changes and the changes in the NWO as we've been talking about, as opposed to just accepting the situation we're at. That's just, and I'm an early career person too, so just FYI, it's not hurt me at all to be involved in this.
Okay, I'm going to take this mic. And I also think we can go about it slowly, right? Where, for example, for the pledge, one publication in 5 years, just to get some other players into this space. It's not that hard. And even for if you're a PhD, maybe write a position paper that you really always wanted to write, and do it like so. So I want to thank you today. There was a lot of discussion actually, which is really great. We can move it into the lunch and discuss some more. I want to thank Iris Durenkamp, which really helped with setting up the donor session in a really short time. I want to thank Davide Amari, who also helped promoting the event a little bit. I want to thank the speakers. I think you were amazing. I learned a lot as well. And I want to thank you for being here. Thank you. I want to thank Donders too.